So rather than address the grooming gang scandal, the Pakistani Muslim rape gang scandal, which has received international attention thanks to Elon Musk's eye being drawn to the case transcripts in January, reporting by Charlie Peters, Sam Bidwell, yours truly, etc. Rather than address that, Labour have decided it makes them look bad, so they're instead appointing an Islamic Blasphemy Council. Britain is not a serious country, okay? So this...
I shouldn't laugh, but it really is like the thing that I always say, which is that no matter what happens in this country, the security state will always turn it into a way of spying on British people.
Exactly, quite. It's just, they import the problem plays out as you might predict, and they use the problem to manufacture consent for surveillance and speech control for the people pointing out the problem, which is like you and me. So the details of this are that Angela Rayner, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, a woman who ate dog food as a kid because her mum was enumerate, and she also raised her son as a single mum to go on and do OnlyFans with his wife, so she's someone I trust running the country.
I think she's very proud of that as well.
Yeah, quite. She is building a 16-member council on anti-Muslim hatred, Islamophobia. So this comes after Labour apparently twice rejected the Raiku report that we covered last week and that I've been reporting on for a while, which called the grooming gangs a grievance narrative invented by the far right and said that tales of two-tier policing or fighting age males being deployed in hotels, you know, the thing that we're actually paying for year on year, they're all made up by the far right and being exploited to recruit people to fascism as well. So after they dismissed that, because they made recommendations, for example, of giving Prevent back to the Home Office, because Prevent isn't just under the Home Office. Because of Michael Gove, it was annexed to Angela Rayner's department, which is for housing, levelling up, and communities. Communities means basically all of the ethnic interest groups that aren't the white British that actually get a say in the governing of the country. Because they rejected that, instead, she's basically doing the Home Office's bidding, but it's under her department. So even though they rejected the findings, they're going to do it anyway, which I suppose shouldn't really shock any of us. And the definition for Islamophobia, because it's important they actually define the thing that they're going to censor us using, the definition of Islamophobia is probably going to be the all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims one that was formally adopted by the Labour Party in 2019, because current Health Secretary and Brutus in waiting, Wes Streeting, helped draft it, which is, and I quote, Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness.
Perceived Muslim.
So, if I think that you have been mean to me because you might have thought I was a Muslim, because I put my, Charles Xavier Cerebro thing on and I read your thoughts, then you can be done as an extremist by the government. It's almost like the what is a woman definition, where it's self-referential and circular.
Well, it's also the classic complaint that I've heard some people have pointing out that Islam isn't a race, it's a religion, although it does seem to be tied very specifically to Middle Eastern Arabs. So, is that an admission that they shouldn't be importing all of these people? No, of course not.
Well, perhaps it's actually the admission, as rooted in Islamic theology, that Islam is a kind of race, because they conceive of themselves as the Ummah, like the global Muslim community, the global Muslim race. But the problem is, if you say that Muslims are more loyal to the Ummah than their own nation, as the
like actually done under this definition now, I'd assume.
It's literally one of the examples listed as Islamophobia.
Yeah. Go.
Speaking of examples being listed, I've reported on this quite extensively for Courage Media in this piece on if Islam is to blame for the grooming gangs. Find out for yourself. But under here, we can find the definition that was given by Wes Streeting, and I can't remember who the Conservative politician was, but she ended up defecting to that Change UK, the Cuck Party, as well. So they wrote this, right? And it's what's absolutely mental is that one example given in the report was, and I quote, the issue of grooming gangs clearly is aimed at and can achieve harm to individual Muslims and is not rooted in any meaningful theological debate, but rather in a racist attempt to other Muslims in general. So at the midst of this scandal going global, they're now setting up an Islamophobia council, which will criminalise any conversations of grooming gangs, which are a specifically Pakistani Muslim phenomenon.
It's never about solving the problem, it's about perception management of the problem. This actually, again, the interesting thing is how much a lot of this language tends to be echoed throughout a lot of mainland Europe as well. There's a bit of a spoiler for the next segment, but I actually found an Institute of Race Relations paper speaking about race relations in Sweden, which of course is becoming something of a melting pot of violence and international gang violence as well, where they're trying to say that the problem is not the foreigners committing crimes. The problem is the over-policing of what they dub to be racialized working class neighborhoods. So ethnic enclaves of a foreign culture made up of a foreign population who commit crimes. People point out that they're committing crimes. Government responds by sending police there. Well, it's obviously the police's presence that is the problem. Obviously, in this case, it's the fact that you're pointing out that it's being committed disproportionately by Muslims is the problem. And if you just stopped pointing it out, then the problem would go away.
In the Riker report, they said the reason they're listing things like the grooming gangs or illegal boat migrants being battery farmed at taxpayers' expense as examples of right-wing extremism is because they quote, prevent integration. So noticing the problems is what's preventing integration rather than the criminal foreign nationals themselves inflicting avoidable harms on the native population, which should remind you that all of these gaslighting attempts, but also immigration policy in general, when they know that the UK is now the #1 country in Western Europe for violent crimes committed by foreign nationals, all these things are a choice. Like, they're being deliberately inflicted upon you. It's not, as Fraser Nelson would say, an accident. It's not like a force of nature has blown 1 million foreign criminals to watch.
Keir Starmer himself said it wasn't an accident.
Yes, quite. A deliberate open-border experiment, which he is continuing.
The funny thing is, the other implication of this, and from the sorts of reports that you can find talking about this kind of violence and grooming epidemics all across Europe, is that the implication is, seeing as you can't say that they're inherently more likely to do this because we've got the statistics to show that they are, the implication is that more police in these areas around these populations just psychologically causes so much distress that it forces them to go out and commit these crimes, which implies that they're essentially naughty children who can't keep their hands out of the cookie jar. So it's either that they're inherently more like this, or the other implication that they just can't resist if you tell them they can't do it.
You know, Harry's law is that no matter what happens, the surveillance state will be turned on the native population. Connor's law is that if you go looking for it, you'll find the blank slate everywhere. That's a blank slate argument. It's the idea that the state itself exists as a kind of provocation against these wonderful people who, under the layers of sediment that have accumulated by being born in a different place and educated in a different culture and not handed enough economic opportunities or youth clubs, they're just like you and me. So if we'd stop subjecting them to unfair standards like law and order, they'll stop doing grenade attacks in Stockholm.
I've got a problem with that, though, which is that if they're just like you and me, if I saw more police in my neighbourhood, I wouldn't just get the urge to commit crime.
You're letting your northern roots down, Harry.
Well, I'm not from Liverpool.
Fair point. Just an example as well on here. So this Islamophobia definition has already been adopted by one of the largest unions in the UK and 50 of the councils, including councils in Manchester and Oxford, etc., where the grooming gangs themselves have operated. So that's a right spit in the eye. Camden Council, who are one of the most mask off for racial grievance in this country, decided to do a press release, a sort of document, on how they're adopting this Islamophobia definition. And among the examples of Islamophobia listed were not supporting an independent Kashmir or independent Palestine, but also, and here's a quote, it listed among the symbols and images associated with classic Islamophobia, e.g., Muhammad being a paedophile, claims of Muslims spreading Islam by the sword or subjugating minority groups under their rule, to characterize...
I guess North Africa was just peaceably converted. I forgot about that.
Spain...
Spain, you know.
Yep, there we go. Or
they were very convincing arguments.
Characterizing Muslims as being, quote, sex groomers, inherently violent or incapable of living harmoniously in plural societies. Now, this is especially grotesque as well. When, remember, the grooming gangs is an ongoing scandal. It's not historical. It's still happening today.
Rochdale grooming gang trials are happening right now.
Well, there are 8 men that have just been sentenced for offences in Keighley. Now, that's near Bradford, where we're not getting an inquiry because the Bradford local authorities have consistently blocked it. Instead, they spent a lot of money on a music festival centre that has had basically no performances. So, child rape victims, no. Wasteful music centre, yes. Weird that. Now, you have to scroll down a bit in this West Yorkshire police thing to see the mugshots. West Yorkshire police, by the way, are the ones that are spending millions on diversity and inclusion.
Yes, that was a recent Freedom of Information report, wasn't it?
So, the names of the men's sentence are Amriaz Ashgar, Perwaz Ashgar, Muhammad Din, Sajjad Mahmood Khan, Zerun Razak, Fayez Ahmed, Imtiaz Ahmed, and Ibra Hussain. None of those are particularly British names. So if you notice the ethnic and religious compositions of the gangs, again, remember, you are Islamophobic according to the government.
Also, for some reason, if you don't have some kind of vested interest in foreign conflicts that have nothing to do with you, that's Islamophobic as well?
Yeah.
I just want to clarify that I heard you correctly, because it might have gone over my head a little bit. So, did you say that somehow not being in support of a free Palestine was Islamophobia?
And Kashmir.
And Kashmir as well. So, not caring about random partisan conflicts in the Middle East and South Asia.
You're racist according to the government.
Okay.
Yep, I know.
Are they racist if they don't care about Cornish nationalism?
Nope.
Oh.
Unless a sufficiently large Islamic population relocate to Cornwall. Yes, exactly. So these 8 men have been given jail sentences of nearly 58 years. Now that's combined, not each. So, one of them was only jailed 4.5 years for child rape. So he'll probably be out on 2 with good behaviour on the inside. And also, there's a trial ongoing, as you mentioned. There's another one in Rochdale. This is something that Charlie Peters has been reporting on. Charlie Peters, absolute gentleman, needs a knighthood. Instead, Sadiq Khan gets one. There you go. The defendants in this trial are Naheem Akram, Mohammed Shahzad, Nisar Hussain, Mohammed Zahid, Ruhiz Khan, Arfan Khan, Mustaq Ahmed, and Kasir Bashir. Notice if you spot a trend here.
Yeah, in my next segment, I've actually got a little bit of the Manchester Evening News reporting on this, and the woman that it happened to, one of 2 women who were the victims, talking about it. It's pretty horrifying.
Yeah, they said that they were raped in a basement beneath a shop as children. Yep, so again, there is absolutely no oubliette dark enough to drop these men in, but again, if you notice the composition of said gangs, you're a racist. Now, people might be thinking, well, what's the indication they're actually going to adopt this definition? Because they haven't announced what definition they're going to adopt yet. It's only just that the Labour Party, under Angela Rayner, adopted it formally, and the person appointed as the head of this commission is arch-Remainer Dominic Grieve, who actually was kicked out of the Conservative Party for trying to overturn Brexit.
And prior to the election, Keir Starmer did an interview with Sadiq Khan where he explicitly said that they were going to do more to tackle Islamophobia using his experience as a prosecutor.
Yes. Dominic Grieve specifically wrote the foreword to the all-party parliamentary group's definition report and then chaired the Citizens UK Commission on Islam. For some reason, there's just constant collaborators with this group. So he's not a Muslim, he's a white Englishman, and yet openly allying with fifth columnists who are trying to put into law a word which was invented by the Muslim Brotherhood to silence dissenters. Also, Wes Streeting, during the grooming gangs scandal, by the way, and that was in January, when it was reaching all the headlines, gave an interview to The Guardian. Remember, Wes Streeting authored this definition, and he said that irresponsible and coarse public discourse by Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage, pointing to the problem, could cause a mosque shooting like in Christchurch. Again, the problem to them is not that girls were raped by their imported client group, it was that you were talking about it. Now, why is this the case? Well, do you remember this? So Angela Rayner had a struggle session in Ashton Mosque right before the election, and it's because Labour lost multiple shadow cabinet members, actually it might be one shadow cabinet member but multiple MPs, to independent, pro-Gaza Islamist MPs, and that constituency is only growing. And so
they're a client group, and the thing with clients is you need to be offering them something, and those demands, especially in a growing population across the UK, aren't going to slow down.
No, and this is why she went to that mosque and said, well, I'm going to make my top priority fighting for a ceasefire in Gaza. That's really going to help us and all of your constituents.
Hey, we've got one now. We've got one now, so you can stop pandering, right?
Isn't it weird as well how, and I'm sure this is Islamophobic, but I don't care, I'm not going to be abiding by this definition. Isn't it weird how they could constantly mobilise protests every weekend and Wednesday in all the major cities, especially Westminster, on behalf of all of the children being blown up in Gaza? But if you were a Muslim, and as Wes Streeting says, you were really just as appalled as everyone else is by having your faith and your ethnicity associated with these rape gangs, isn't it weird how they don't mobilise a protest unless they're told to by Reich, who's controlled spontaneity efforts? They don't mobilise a protest to say, not in our name, justice for the girls. Isn't it weird how there's very few Muslims, like the chap that Dan spoke to from Oldham Council, or Taj Hagi from the Oxford Islamic Centre. Isn't it funny that you can name the 5 that have bothered to try and do something about it? There's not these mass Muslim protests Weird that. Wonder why. Anyway, the net effect is, of course, whether or not this actually gets passed into law, this sort of catch-all net, is to create a constant chilling effect to protect said client group from criticism in the hopes that they still vote for Labour. Now, the thing is, as Rakib Hassan has pointed out before, no matter how often you try and pander to the interests of British Muslims, if there is a Muslim party that emerges, and there is a Muslim vote organisation connected to Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is a prescribed group, but there you go, if that exists, they're just going to vote for the Muslim candidates no matter what. So there's actually no point even appeasing, but we're going to get appeasement. And a great example of appeasement, sadly, is another thing that happened this week, which is that the Manchester police have doxed a man who they have charged and now been prosecuted for burning the Quran. So they gave his face, his name, and the road he lives on out. Now, we're not going to do that here, because I don't want this man to be killed. I can only...
But apparently the Manchester police don't care if he is.
Yeah, knowing the threat posed by actual mental jihadist groups that exist in this country, you've basically outsourced his assassination to Islamic vigilantes.
There's not many ways to interpret this.
No. So that the Free Speech Union believes that the Greater Manchester Police should have liaised with the Crown Prosecution Service before making these details public, and the failure to do so will obviously result in a threat to his life. By the way, he's not getting state-sponsored security. Axel Rudakabana's family are. Yeah. So just remember that.
It's interesting, again, the two-tier system that we live in. The Manchester Police can do something like this, but on cases like the Axel Rudakabana one, if we had speculated at all about his motivations or potential terror aspects of the attack, we could have been charged with contempt of court, I would assume.
Yeah, well, we'd heard plenty of things, rumour mill things,
yes,
in our capacity as reporters about his prevent referrals before. And
I was told outright by a member of the Home Office, strange circumstances that I happened to run into at a friend's wedding, who just told me outright, oh yeah, he'd been referred to prevent multiple times.
Yeah.
Which turned out to be absolutely true. He also told me some other details, which I can't really go into. But given the accuracy of that, I can only assume the other information that he gave me was correct. If I talk about it, I might get a fine, go to prison. Manchester police can just dox somebody.
Yeah,
Will there be consequences for this?
No.
No.
There also aren't consequences for any of the police officers that helped cover up the rape gangs, for example. But they're the ones that are going to be kicking down your door and calling you Islamophobic. So the details of this case that I'll mention to you is that Greater Manchester Police arrested the man on suspicion of a racially aggravated public order offence under the Public Order Act 1986, thanks Mrs. Thatcher, most likely under Section 4A or Section 5, and this is treated as a racially or religiously aggravated under Section 31 of the Crime and Disorder Act 1998, thanks Tony Blair, where it increases the penalty where hostility towards a racial or religious group is demonstrated or presumed. So what ended up happening was he was arrested because he burned a Quran on Saturday the 1st of February because his daughter was killed during the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. So, fair enough. Might be a little bit annoyed at Islamic terror groups like Hamas if they've literally killed his daughter. You might be able to understand that. The complainant that got him arrested was named as well, Fahad Iqbal. And Manchester Evening News here, which I'm not going to dwell on too much because they decide to provide the victim's information, but Iqbal said he gave a victim statement. Now, the idea that he's treated as a victim in the first place is mad, but victim statement. And he said, I was quite shocked, disgusted, and offended. I'm a Muslim. I still can't believe someone would do this. When he began to burn the Quran, my heart was about to break out. This is the most emotion I've ever felt. This is literally the priority, the hurt feelings of random Muslims because pages of the Quran were burned because a guy lost his daughter in a war halfway around the world. That's being prioritised. The rape gangs, not. In fact, they're prioritising people talking about the rape gangs. Great. Prosecutor Robin Lynch told Manchester Magistrates Court that the defendant was part of a crowd of supporters that gathered near the Glade of Light Memorial to the 22 murdered, including many children, in the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017. So again, might be a bit sensitive to Islamic extremism in that scenario. A passerby tried to intervene, but the defendant shouted, "This is what I think of your Quran. Islam has no place in civil society." He then ripped out the pages to talk about paedophilia and set those pages alight. Interesting that the Quran has lots of pages talking about paedophilia. But again, remember, it's Islamophobic to actually read verses from the Quran. and the Hadiths, apparently. The defendant told officers he was demonstrating solidarity with another anti-Islam activist in Sweden. And the reason I raise this is because he was murdered. Now, this is Ayaan Hirsi Ali's report on Courage Media. It's very good. Josh spoke about this in his recent segment on Sweden's Islamic migrant crime, something that you're going to be covering in a moment. For those who don't know, this is Salwan Najem, and he was murdered on Wednesday, the 29th of January, in a Sharia-style execution in his home, and I apologise if I can't pronounce this properly, but this is Södertälje, near Stockholm. The Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said, quote, "I can assure you that the security services are deeply involved because there is obviously a risk that there is a connection to a foreign power." So they think this also might have been, an Islamist group hit job from a foreign power. So there you go. Good that we've imported those politics into Europe, isn't it? Mamika was set to be handed a verdict in his ongoing trial for, quote, incitement to racial hatred, similar charge that the last chap in Manchester got charged with, and agitation against an ethnic group. He's Iraqi. Ethnic group. The Ummah? There you go. And this was in Sweden. For burning a Quran in protest in Stockholm in August 2023. And Mamika was, for context, born a Syriac Catholic in Iraq and obviously persecuted before the Iraqi civil war and then the Iraq war itself. In June 2023, he stomped on the Quran, wrapped it in bacon, and lit a few pages on fire, and then slammed it shut and kicked it like a football. This obviously isn't the first time this has happened as well, because Turkey tried to block Sweden's NATO membership in January 2023 after a guy called Rasmus Paludan, who was a Swedish-Danish activist, did something very similar. He burned a copy of the Quran outside the Turkish embassy. So this has international implications. Mamika then sought asylum in Norway in 2024, but was arrested and deported back to Sweden. So an actual refugee from Islamism that has taken over the country that had taken him in before was sent to his death. And he had a co-defendant as well. So the co-defendant, after this guy was killed in the jihadist execution, the co-defendant was charged. So the Swedish justice system, Stockholm court, gave Salwan Najem a suspended sentence and a fine on Monday morning because he was convicted of incitement against an ethnic group. That chap. Mm-hmm. Ethnic hatred. Again, against who? So yeah, he came from Iraq in 1998 and has been a Swedish citizen since June 2005 and said his actions were legitimate criticisms of religion protected by Sweden's freedom of expression laws. But Goran Lundahl, the judge in the case, said that freedom of expression did not constitute, quote, a free pass to do or say anything. So there's no police protection for him.
Well, this was, what was it, Olaf Scholz saying that, yeah, we've kind of got free speech in Germany, but not for the far right.
Yeah, you can't offend the imported Islamist tribal minority who are growing demographically and using that demographic pressure to turn into democratic pressure.
Who only ever do anything bad due to socio-economic pressures.
Yeah, so Britain, a fundamentally unserious country, is going to get an Islamic Blasphemy Council and take another step further to a caliphate. So if our American brethren are listening, we would welcome you as liberators.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.